Thank you, Madam Speaker. Proud, as always, to stand in this House and represent the great people of Timmins, James Bay. And what we learned from this pandemic is it has been a very hard teacher, but it has made things very clear. Because for decades, we have seen a growing inequality in Canada, a growing split across the economies of North America and Europe, where the gains that our veteran grandparents who came back from the Second World War and built the middle class, we have watched that chipped away by Liberal and Conservative policies, favoring the movement of capital and the undermining of basic worker rights, such as pensions, security. And when COVID hit, millions of Canadians suddenly didn't have enough money to pay their rent at the end of the month. That's how precarious people were. We're dealing with small businesses that are not able to get by. And the Liberals, my problem with the Liberals is they have the best policies in some ways in the world in terms of what they say. They just don't deliver on it. So when we hear the government talking about their rent support and how they're supporting people, I'm getting calls from businesses who are saying, where is that support? Because I can't survive this week. But our Prime Minister had all the time to prorogue to get away from the Kielburger brothers scandal because he doesn't know what it's like to try and get by on a small business. And so this motion, Madam Speaker, is about the two Canadas that have emerged. Because we know that as people have lost their businesses, they're struggling to get by, they've had to rely on the payments that we forced the government to bring in to get people to the end of the month each month. Other people have made out like bandits. The pandemic has been great for billionaires. We look at Gale and Weston, $1.6 billion in extra profits, while Dominion workers barely getting by on minimum wage in Newfoundland are out on strike getting nothing. The same Gale and Weston that lives in a gated community, the same Gale and Weston that the Prime Minister gave $12 million to fix his fridges. How could I explain to my mother when she called me and said, are you kidding me that Gale and Weston got $12 million to fix his fridges when us seniors have nothing? And I said, I know, Mom, but that's the Liberals for you. Chip Wilson, honest to God, that's his name. Vancouver billionaire, he made $2.8 billion during the pandemic. Jim Pattison, $1.7 billion. What we're talking about is that they're making a level of income that is so far beyond anything we've been able to see in the past, that our motion, which has really flipped the biscuit on the Liberals and the Conservatives, they just think it's outrageous socialism, 1% tax on those making over $20 million. 1%. The PBO's costed it out. That will bring in $5.6 billion. There's going to need to be an enormous amount of money to go out from the federal government to get people through the pandemic. So it's fairly reasonable to say those who are making such massive excess profits in the billions, they can pay their fair share. And I'd say 1%, hey, that's not even fair. That's giving them a steal. But I think what we got to talk about is breaking down this myth of the middle class. You know, the middle class and those wanting to join, the Prime Minister says that all the time. If the Prime Minister's speeches were a Liberal drinking game, you'd be bombed after 4 minutes because every time you turn around, he says the middle class and those wanting to join it. The reality is that I grew up, and my dad grew up in a really different middle class than the Prime Minister grew up in. So maybe the Prime Minister doesn't know what built the middle class. Because what we've seen from the Parliamentary Budget Office is that the top 1% in Canada now own over 25% of the wealth. That is a staggering disconnect. But what's even more frightening is that the bottom 40% of Canadians have only 1.2% of the wealth. There's something wrong in our society. The society that was built on hard work. You know, you go to school, you get an education, you build your business, you get your savings, you get your kids to university, but the bottom 40% of Canada have only 1.2% of the wealth. That's not a natural state of the affairs. Old Bill Morneau thought it was natural. He's told all the young people who are facing massive levels of student debt and precarious work, hey, it's the new normal. It's not normal. It's a result of policies. So what we need to look at, Madam Speaker, is how we actually recalibrate the tax policies in this country. I ran a small business. We spent most of our time just trying to figure out our taxes all the time. It was a nightmare. And yet, Amazon pays no tax. And I raise the issue of Amazon because, to me, it was the line in the sand moment when I realized that this talk, and there was a time when it was really amazing how all us parliamentarians were coming together and working together in the pandemic. But it was when the Prime Minister came out and he said that Canada's partner in fighting the pandemic was going to be Jeff Bezos and Amazon. I mean, Amazon, one of the rottenest companies on the planet, that made $11 billion in profit in the United States, paid no tax. They don't pay tax in Canada. Their vice president, Tim Bray, quit because of the horrific abusive conditions that workers were facing in the Amazon warehouses during the COVID pandemic. And the Prime Minister said, let's make Amazon our partner. I say that because Jeff Bezos is so far beyond billionaire status, it's hard to even classify what planet he lives in. But Amazon has been ripping the heart out of small business, small downtown Canada. That has been their business model, that they underprice everything, that in the pandemic they've been making this kind of money. But it's the Prime Minister who reaches out to Jeff Bezos and said, hey, you don't pay taxes in Canada. Hey, 19,000 of your workers suffered COVID illnesses because they were forced to work in crappy conditions. But our Prime Minister reaches out his hand to Jeff Bezos and says, you're the company Canada wants to work with. Instead of local Canadian businesses, instead of local Canadian support. It is this disconnect with the billionaire class that we need to start taking on. Now, Madam Speaker, we talk about the issue of precarious work, of people not having savings, of people being stuck in debt. The crisis of workers in Canada is no longer simply working class. There is a new working class in Canada, and that working class is very much white collar in many instances. You know, my father was a miner's son. He had to quit school at 16 to go to work. My mom was a miner's daughter. She quit school at 15. My dad was really good in mathematics, so instead of getting him to go underground, they got him a job in a brokerage office. And when my dad was 40, he made enough money to go to university. That was our trip into the middle class, because my dad getting an education, he became a professor of economics, and because he had an education, he got a job. And he bought a little house. He bought one car, and when it died, it stayed in the driveway for about 15 years till the local high school came and said, hey, can we have your car for parts for our... But that was my dad. He wasn't going to buy anything else. He saved everything so that when he died, my mom would have a proper pension. That was the middle class. My neighbors, when we moved to Toronto, who had one income, their family went to university, they owned their home. And I look at the precarious nature of work today. You go to university and come out with $100,000 worth of debt. 22% of Canadian professionals are in precarious work. I talk to people who went to become professors and they make less money than you would at McDonald's. It's the new business model. And the problem with that business model is that if you don't have a society where people have stability in their income and in their savings, they end up being in a situation where they cannot retire, where they live in poverty. And so we have a government that makes all kinds of promises. God Almighty, they told us about the rapid Indigenous housing. What a scam, rapid. I've never seen a rapid Indigenous housing plan ever from the Liberals. Oh, they're now saying they're taxing the web giants. Well, that's not true. They're not going near the web giants. Pharmacare, greatest hits in 1997. Wasn't that the Spice Girls years? I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I want to hear the Liberals stop saying they're serious about pharmacare and actually deliver it. Madam Speaker, we're hearing lots from this government. but they're not taking action. This is a simple thing to do. 1% tax, make over 20 million, that will help pay so that we can have a fair and a better society.